Karen's HOA charged me $50,000 in violations, so I blocked the road I own and installed a toll booth. They say you never forget the moment your life changes. Mine came with a crumpled envelope duct taped to my front door, flapping in the wind like a warning flag. I thought it was junk mail, maybe another coupon packet or one of those passive-aggressive neighborhood bulletins reminding us to mow our lawns and not park on the curb. But this was different. The envelope was official-looking, overly stiff, like it had been laminated by someone with too much time and a deep love for bureaucracy. Emblazoned at the top, notice of violation, immediate action required. I opened it right there on the porch, coffee in one hand, still wearing pajama pants and fuzzy socks. Then I saw the number. $50,000. That's not a typo. $50,000 in fines for a laundry list of offenses I didn't even know were real infractions. Things like non-compliant mailbox coloration. My mailbox was navy blue, apparently not within the HOA's acceptable taupe spectrum. Unauthorized yard ornaments, which I later found out referred to my garden flamingo named Randall, and failure to file foliage alignment request. I'm not making that up. They actually cited me for not getting approval before trimming my hedge. I blinked 3 times, reread it, and then laughed because it felt like something my prank-loving brother would have cooked up. He once gift-wrapped my entire kitchen with Christmas paper, including individual forks. But this wasn't him. This was signed, sealed, and delivered by the HOA president herself, Karen Witherspoon. And right then, I realized 2 things. First, this woman had way too much time on her hands. And second, this wasn't just an overreach. This was a full-blown declaration of war. I looked at the letter again, this time with narrowed eyes. I hadn't signed up for this HOA. In fact, I remembered clearly that when I bought this house 10 years ago, I specifically avoided any property tied up in HOA nonsense. I wanted peace and quiet, not lawn inspections and holiday decoration fines. So how exactly did I end up on the receiving end of a $50,000 invoice from the Neighborhood Control Committee? That's when I went inside, fired up my dusty filing cabinet, and dug out the one document that would flip this whole thing upside down. Let me paint the scene for you. Karen Witherspoon isn't just a stickler. She's a one-woman code enforcement machine with a superiority complex and a clipboard that never leaves her side. She walks around the neighborhood like she owns it, because in her mind, she does. Aviator sunglasses, pastel polo shirts, and that ever-present bitter-pursed smile that says, "I'd love to ruin your afternoon." Before she got elected HOA president, this neighborhood was chill. People painted their doors fun colors, kids drew chalk art on sidewalks, and nobody cared if your grass was half an inch too tall. But Karen changed everything. Within a week of taking over, she banned basketball hoops, outlawed garden gnomes, and sent out a newsletter explaining how bird feeders encouraged aggressive avian behavior. She once fined a neighbor $75 because their welcome mat had glitter on it. Not kidding. And now she'd turned her sights on me. Why? Hard to say. Maybe because my mailbox wasn't beige. Maybe because I had a hammock out front that wasn't visually uniform. Or maybe, and most likely, because I didn't roll over when she started sniffing around my property line. But here's what Karen didn't know, what almost no one knew. When I bought this house from the previous owner, a retired highway contractor named Earl, the deal came with a bizarre clause buried in the paperwork. Earl had built the access road into the neighborhood himself back in the 70s, and for some reason, he'd never transferred ownership to the city or any association. He owned it. When he sold the house, he transferred it to me. I remember thinking it was weird, but kind of cool. I didn't do anything with it, just assumed it was a formality. The road was already there, already used by everyone, and I had no plans to put a toll booth or barricade on it. Why would I? I was just happy to have a quiet house with a workshop and a nice view. For nearly a decade, nothing ever came of it. But now it was the single most important detail in this whole ridiculous saga. After I got that letter, I didn't storm into the HOA office guns blazing. Number I went to the county clerk's office, pulled a certified copy of the property deed, and read it 3 times to be sure. There it was, clear as day. The access road, technically named Birch Hollow Drive, but lovingly referred to by locals as the entrance, was privately owned by me. Not the HOA, not the city. Me. No easement. No legal right of usage. They'd been using my road for free for years, and now they had the audacity to hit me with 50 grand in imaginary fines. That's when the switch flipped. I wasn't just going to defend myself. I was going to make a point. A big one. Because if there's one thing I've learned from being a civil engineer, it's this. Infrastructure matters, and owning the road means owning the rules. So I made a plan that involved permits, solar panels, a license plate scanner, and just the right amount of petty vengeance. Because when Karen picked a fight, she didn't realize she was swinging at someone who literally built roads for a living. She thought I'd back down. Instead, I was about to build something that would make her clipboard-toting, lawn-measuring heart explode. I didn't start with the toll booth. First, I gave them a chance. I called the HOA office, politely requested a meeting, and even brought along my deed, the actual certified copy that clearly stated the road was private and under my ownership. I thought maybe, just maybe, this was some bureaucratic mix-up that could be resolved with a conversation. But no. When I walked into that beige little trailer, masquerading as a professional office, I was met with Karen herself, flanked by 2 other board members who looked like they got kicked out of mall security training for being too intense. Karen didn't even look up from her clipboard at first. She just said, "Ah, Mr. Patterson, I was wondering when you'd come crawling in." I calmly laid the deed on the table and explained, in plain language, that I wasn't under their jurisdiction and never had been, that the road wasn't part of the HOA's legal domain, and unless they had paperwork to the contrary, they had no grounds to fine me for anything, let alone $50,000 worth of nonsense. Karen flipped through the deed, gave it a glance like she was reading a fast food menu, then actually rolled her eyes and said, "We don't base our rules on paperwork. We base them on what keeps the neighborhood beautiful." That was the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with someone reasonable. I was dealing with a full-blown suburban dictator with delusions of grandeur. And since logic and facts didn't work, it was time to speak the only language Karen seemed to understand: control. I called my Uncle Ron that same afternoon. Ron's the kind of guy who once installed fake parking meters on his block to deter outsiders. He's got a tool for everything, and a story to go with each one. When I told him I wanted to build a toll booth at the entrance to my road, he didn't even hesitate. "Version 1.0 or full petty?" he asked. "Let's go full petty," I said. We found an old amusement park ticket booth on a resale site and picked it up that weekend. It needed work, but it had character. Peeling paint, classic shape, just enough of that vintage fairground vibe to make it both hilarious and oddly intimidating. We spent 3 weekends rewiring it, adding a solar-powered retractable arm, installing a license plate reader, and building a simple pay-by-phone app. I wanted it to be completely legal, completely functional, and just annoying enough to make every board member feel the consequences of their overreach. I even ran it all by a lawyer, just to make sure. His reaction? He laughed so hard he had to put down his coffee. Then he said, "You've got every right. You own the road. They've been squatting on it for free. Make 'em pay." By the end of the month, the booth was installed. I poured a concrete foundation, ran underground wiring, even added a little light-up sign, "Private road." Toll in effect, $3 per vehicle. HOA board members, $15. Was the board fee excessive? Not at all. It was a poetic number, the same amount Karen fined a neighbor for leaving a decorative pumpkin out past Thanksgiving. I gave everyone 1 week's notice, printed flyers, posted signs, even sent an email blast to every address I could find in the public records. I made it clear, residents could get a free windshield sticker and drive through at no cost if they signed a waiver agreeing that I wasn't under HOA authority and they respected the private nature of the road. It was clean. It was clever. And it was coming for them like a freight train of accountability. Monday morning arrived with the kind of nervous buzz you get before a big event, half block party, half reckoning. I stood next to the booth, coffee in one hand, and waited. First car, Karen. Of course. She rolled up in her BMW like she was pulling into Versailles. Then she saw the gate, slammed the brakes. Jaw dropped. Her window rolled down faster than I've ever seen. "You can't do this," she shouted, as if saying it louder made it true. "Oh, but I can," I said, gesturing to the laminated sign. "Private road. Rules are rules, right?" Her mouth worked like she was chewing invisible gum, but she had no comeback. Behind her, cars started lining up. People were confused at first, some annoyed, until they saw the waiver option and realized they could opt out of the HOA nonsense entirely. That changed the vibe fast. A few even thanked me as they drove through. One guy tossed me a protein bar. Another gave a thumbs up and said, "About time someone stood up to her." Karen, though, refused to move. She sat there, arms crossed, dead in the middle of the lane, honking at me like I was going to cave. Behind her, the honking grew louder. Neighbors started rolling down windows. "Move your car," someone yelled. "We're gonna be late." Karen shouted back something about unlawful taxation and community safety, but no one was buying it. They saw what this was, a tantrum, a power grab gone wrong. And I just stood there, sipping coffee, watching the meltdown unfold like a front row seat to the fall of Rome. But she wasn't done. The next day, she and her cronies came back in full stormtrooper mode, clipboards in hand, marching down my driveway like they were serving a royal decree. Greg, one of her yes men, carried a ruler. Bonnie, her overly enthusiastic sidekick, had a camera. They started inspecting my bushes, pointing at my lawn ornaments, muttering about possible code violations. I stepped outside and said, "You're on private property. You need to leave." Karen didn't flinch. "We're conducting a standard visual inspection," she said, like that gave her the power to trespass. "I'm not part of your HOA. You have no authority here," I replied, showing her the waiver she'd already seen and ignored. "And if you don't leave, I'll be calling the police." That shook them. Bonnie shifted uncomfortably. Greg pretended to measure a flower pot. Karen glared at me like I'd just insulted her family name, but I stood my ground. I told them this was their final warning. Any further trespassing would be met with legal action. They left, but not quietly. Karen threw one last comment over her shoulder. "This isn't over." I believed her, because people like Karen don't just quit when they lose. They plot. They scheme. And sure enough, within 48 hours, I found a flyer taped to every single mailbox in the neighborhood. Community alert, dangerous individual operating unauthorized toll booth. It was printed in bold red letters like I was running some underground crime ring. At the bottom, a link to Karen's personal blog, where she'd written an unhinged rant comparing me to a toll troll from medieval times and claiming I was destabilizing the community with my rogue infrastructure. I didn't even need to respond. The neighborhood did it for me. The Facebook group lit up with people posting their own HOA horror stories. One guy said he got fined for having a flag that wasn't American enough. Another showed a picture of a warning letter for garage clutter visible during door operation. The best part? A bunch of residents started showing up at my booth, not to complain, but to thank me. They signed the waiver, got their free pass, and some even brought cookies. Someone dropped off a hand-painted sign that said, HOA Free Zone, Toll Booth of Justice. I nailed it to the booth that afternoon. Karen had picked the wrong road. Literally and figuratively. It started small, barely noticeable really. Just a set of fresh tire tracks in the grass beside the toll booth one foggy morning. At first, I thought maybe someone had tried to turn around or cut the line, which had become a bit of a morning ritual at that point. People were actually lining up early to grab coffee, chat and make jokes about HOA drama while passing through the booth. But something about those tracks felt off. They weren't wide like a car. They were narrow and deep, like from a trailer or maybe construction equipment. I followed them around to the back of the booth, where the grass dipped into a small embankment. And that's when I saw it. The security panel that powered the license plate reader had been tampered with. The protective cover was cracked, the wiring exposed, and the backup battery cable, cut clean through like it had been sliced with wire cutters. My heart didn't race right away. It just sank. Because up until that moment, everything had been legal, funny, even a little theatrical. But this was sabotage. This was criminal. This meant someone specific, had crossed the line from passive-aggressive to straight-up felony. I went inside, pulled up the booth security logs, and sure enough, there was a gap in the footage. A total blackout from 2:53 to 3:17 a.m. The main camera had gone offline. When I checked the secondary battery feed, it had been disabled too, which meant someone had done their homework. They knew where the wires were. They knew how to disable the system. And judging by how carefully the damage had been done, they were probably trying to make sure there was no record of what they were planning next. I didn't have proof it was Karen, of course. But come on. Who else had the motive, the grudge, and the complete lack of self-awareness to think they'd get away with something like this? Still, I didn't want to go off half-cocked. So I called the police, specifically Officer Delgado, the same guy who'd laughed with me the day I first showed him my property deed and let him drive through the booth for free. I told him what I found. He said, "Funny you should call. We've had a report of unmarked construction equipment showing up behind lot 42. You know who owns that lot?" I didn't even have to check. I already knew. Karen's cousin, of course. A guy who hadn't been seen at a single HOA meeting in 2 years, but had somehow managed to be listed as the emergency contact for all board decisions involving property improvements. I drove down to the lot to see it myself, and sure enough, there it was. A yellow backhoe, parked crookedly behind a row of hedges, still warm. No company markings, no permits, no crew in sight. Just a mess of spray paint lines on the ground, and some broken stakes marking out what looked suspiciously like the start of a road. Not a driveway, not landscaping. A road, a bypass. They were trying to go around the toll booth. That afternoon, I called the zoning office and forwarded everything. Photos, GPS coordinates, a screenshot of Karen talking to a construction guy the day before. City workers showed up within the hour, shut it all down, issued a stop work order and a citation for unauthorized excavation. The backhoe was towed. The paint was flagged. And just like that, their brilliant plan to build a secret road through protected land was dead on arrival. Still, Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. When her illegal construction scheme failed, she switched tactics again, this time going full smear campaign. 2 days later, every mailbox in the neighborhood got a bright red letter, bold text, all caps. The toll tyrant's true agenda. Inside was a 5-page manifesto written by Karen, accusing me of operating a rogue financial scheme, threatening community safety, and trying to turn Silver Pines into a privatized dystopia ruled by a man with a vendetta and a cash register. She even included a fake chart with projected toll revenue over the next 10 years, as if I was going to pave the street in gold bricks and build a monument to myself with everyone's toll money. She called me a toll baron, a rogue infrastructure capitalist, and my personal favorite, a backyard despot with a god complex. I wasn't even mad. It was so wildly off base it was practically satire. So I scanned the whole letter, highlighted the funniest quotes, and posted them on the neighborhood Facebook page with the caption, "Apparently, I'm a supervillain now. Who knew?" That post exploded. Comments flooded in. People posted their own Karen stories. One guy shared how she fined him $50 because his car had pollen on it. Pollen. Another said she once threatened to report a 10-year-old for operating an illegal lemonade business. And right there in the middle of it all was a poll someone created. Who do you trust more with your money? Jake the toll guy or Karen the HOA queen? Jake won by a landslide. Not that it was a competition, but still. It felt like the neighborhood had finally seen behind the curtain. They weren't just laughing, they were rallying. Then something I never expected happened. An anonymous email landed in my inbox. No subject line, no message, just one attachment. I hesitated for a second, opened it, and there it was. A scanned document, dated 5 years ago, supposedly signed by me. An easement agreement giving full control of the road to the HOA. I blinked. Then I laughed. Because the signature, it looked like someone had traced my name using a kindergarten stencil set. And a Sharpie. Sloppy. Crooked. Filled with typos. But here's the scary part. If they'd submitted this to the county and I hadn't caught it, it might have actually passed as legal. I called my lawyer Nancy and she nearly screamed. "This is felony fraud," she said. "You need to go public right now." So that's what I did. I printed side-by-side comparisons of my real signature and the forgery, labeled them in red marker, and stapled the whole thing to a display board I parked next to the toll booth. The next morning, it was like a school field trip. Neighbors came by in waves, pointing, reading, shaking their heads. "Unbelievable," one guy said. "They really tried to forge your name." "Oh yeah," I said, sipping my coffee. "But they didn't count on one thing. I keep my receipts." Then I went a step further. I contacted the local news station. A week earlier, they wouldn't have cared. But now this was a story. HOA fraud, a fake document, a privately owned road. The whole saga wrapped in suburban drama and flamingo lawn ornaments. They sent a crew out that same evening. Interviewed me right in front of the booth. The story aired that night under the headline, "Toll Booth Tyrant or HOA Hero." Even the anchor couldn't keep a straight face. And that was it. The tide officially turned. Karen was losing control. The community was wide awake. And for the first time in a very long time, people were actually smiling when they drove through that gate. Not because they had to pay, but because they wanted to. I wasn't there to watch her get cuffed, but I heard the story from no less than 6 neighbors, each one adding a little more flavor to the retelling. Apparently, Officer Delgado walked into the community center like he was stepping into a western, badge gleaming, backup right behind him. Karen was mid-rant, something about community integrity and moral decay, when he calmly called her name. She stopped mid-sentence, turned around like she'd been tapped on the shoulder by fate itself, and her expression dropped faster than the HOA's approval rating. "Karen Witherspoon," Delgado said, reading from the warrant like it was a prophecy. "You're under arrest for trespassing, destruction of private property, forgery, misuse of community funds, and conspiracy to commit unpermitted construction." Word for word. The room went silent, dead silent. No gasps, no shouts, just the sound of everything unraveling at once. Karen tried to argue naturally, claimed it was a mistake, a misunderstanding, that she was being targeted. But nobody backed her up. Not Greg, not Bonnie, not the handful of loyalists who used to nod like bobbleheads at every word she said. She was alone. She went out without a struggle, but with a glare so sharp it could have cut drywall. And just like that, the woman who fined a neighbor $100 for an unapproved porch swing was escorted out of her self-made empire like a shoplifter caught on aisle 5. The neighborhood didn't exactly erupt into celebration, but there was a vibe shift. You could feel it. People walked a little lighter, waved a little more. Gnomes started popping up again. Flags of all colors returned to porches. Someone even dared to paint their garage door teal. It was quiet, peaceful, for a while. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that institutions like HOAs don't die just because the figurehead falls. Greg and Bonnie weren't arrested. They weren't even reprimanded, aside from public embarrassment and some brutal memes floating around online. Instead, they stepped in like two reluctant understudies forced to perform after the lead gets dragged off stage. For a minute, I thought maybe they'd keep their heads down and just let the whole thing dissolve. I even started hoping we could finally put this circus behind us. But nope. A week after Karen's arrest, I found a duct-taped notice slapped to the front of the toll booth. HOA letterhead, all caps bold font. Emergency infrastructure annexation. I actually laughed out loud. According to their new claim, they were invoking a little-known clause buried in the original community charter. Something about the board's right to seize control of adjacent infrastructure in the event of a community access crisis. Apparently, the toll booth I built on my privately owned road now qualified as such a crisis. It was so ridiculous I half thought it was a prank. But no, it was real. They were trying to legally steal the road. So I called Nancy. She dug up the original HOA charter from the county archive and spent a whole night reviewing it. Her conclusion? Technically, the clause exists, but unless the road was ever officially incorporated into the HOA's jurisdiction, which it wasn't, they have no leg to stand on. The burden of proof is entirely on them. Which would have been fine, except they had something. Later that night, I got an anonymous email from a burner account. No message, no signature, just a PDF attachment labeled "Look closely." I opened it, expecting nonsense. What I got instead was a scanned easement agreement, dated, stamped, with my forged signature on the bottom, again. But this one was different. It looked cleaner, more deliberate. The font matched, the formatting was correct. Someone had taken their time crafting this fake. It wasn't a last-minute panic job like the first forgery. It was planted, meant to hold up under scrutiny. And if they had already submitted this to the county, it could complicate everything. I printed out the document, highlighted every inconsistency, and brought it straight to Nancy. She flipped through it, eyebrows raised the whole time. They've crossed the line again. This isn't just a forged document. This is premeditated fraud, with legal intent. She paused. This is jail time if you push it. That's when I decided we weren't keeping this quiet anymore. The neighborhood needed to see what was still happening. So I made another board, bigger this time. Laminated, color-coded, side-by-side comparisons of my real signature and the fake one. I added a giant header at the top that read, "When they can't win fair, they forge." I set it up next to the toll booth that morning, complete with a QR code linking to the public property records showing the road's true ownership. The response was overwhelming. People stopped by in droves. Some brought lawn chairs. One lady brought muffins. There was anger, disbelief, and more than a few people asking how they could help. I didn't have to rally them. Karen and her cronies had done all the work for me. They were done being pushed around by people who treated the community like a personal playground. That day, the neighborhood officially flipped. Within 48 hours, A petition was circulating door to door to recall the entire HOA board. People who had never spoken up before were suddenly eager to share their own HOA horror stories. One woman told me Karen fined her for having non-regulation Halloween music playing through a speaker. Another guy got a letter because his porch light was too bright and disruptive to visual harmony. Enough was enough. And I decided to sweeten the deal. Anyone who signed the petition got a gold Fast Pass sticker for their windshield, allowing priority access through the toll booth and a free coffee every Saturday morning. That little addition sealed it. I had a line of people stretching down the block. By the end of the week, over half the neighborhood had signed. Greg and Bonnie tried to push back. They called an emergency HOA meeting, sent out one last desperate flyer accusing me of weaponizing community infrastructure. Bonnie even tried to claim I was running a commercial operation without a permit. But the damage was done. The people had spoken. And the final blow came when I rolled up to that emergency meeting with a tray of toll booth blend cappuccinos and a printed settlement agreement. I offered one last deal: no lawsuits, no jail time, no fines, for anyone, if the HOA formally dissolved, publicly apologized, and signed over exclusive rights to the road in perpetuity. They didn't even argue. Greg looked at the document, pale and tired. Bonnie stared at the floor. They signed. 3 days later, Greg stood in front of the community on a makeshift stage, mic shaking in his hand, and read the apology aloud. We, the former board members of the Silver Pines HOA, acknowledge that we acted outside our authority, misrepresented legal documents, and targeted a resident unfairly. We are hereby dissolving the HOA and relinquishing any and all claims to shared infrastructure, including Birch Hollow Drive. There was no applause, just a deep collective exhale. And then it was over. The next few weeks were like spring after a harsh winter. The neighborhood came back to life. Kids played on the sidewalks without fear of chalk fines. Someone installed a windmill just for fun. Mailboxes got painted in wild colors. Gnomes stood proudly again. And the toll booth? It stayed. But now it was something different. I remodeled it, added a new awning, a little serving window, even some patio furniture. On weekends, it became a community hub. Free coffee, music, conversation. We called it the No Karen Cafe. And every now and then, someone would bring a new decoration for the booth. A mini disco ball, a plaque honoring Doug the Defender, my original garden gnome who now sat on a pedestal with a tiny cape. I didn't charge anyone anymore. The toll booth had done its job. It had started a movement. And one Saturday, while I was refilling the espresso machine, a kid rode by on his bike, skidded to a stop and said, "Hey, is the toll still real?" I smiled. "Only if your next HOA tries to tell you what color your hammock can be." He laughed and took off down the road. I stood there, watching the neighborhood go about its day. And I realized something. Revenge doesn't have to be angry or loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's clever. And sometimes it's a cup of coffee and a lawn gnome named Doug, standing tall on a road no one's ever going to take from you again.